SRM Institute of Science and Technology, Engineering, Medical and Health Sciences, Management, Science and Humanities, Law, Agriculture Sciences. Admissions open.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. A warm welcome on day 4 of the International Talk series. Thank you all for your tremendous support extended throughout the Alumni Connect series, the Celebrity Talks, and the Research series. I, Architect A.R. Narayani, Associate Professor, School of Architecture and Interior Design, and a proud alumna of SRM, I'm happy to be your host for the day. The sessions are curated to bring bright minds across the globe and share innovative and inspirational conversations. We welcome our guest of honor for the day, Dr. Lata Pillai, Director, QAR, SRM IST. Welcome, ma'am. I welcome our Dean, Dr. P. Satish Kumar, who has been instrumental in creating this platform for us. I welcome our speaker for the day, Dr. John Meyer, who will share his thoughts on design thinking. Welcome, sir. A special mention to Architect Dinesh, visiting faculty, School of Architecture and Interior Design, SRM IST, for his tremendous help in connecting with John. Now, I request our convener, Professor Vayapuri Thangavelu, to give the opening remarks. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, one and all. I welcome you all for the fourth episode of International Talk Series 2020, hosted by School of Architecture and Interior Design, SRM Institute of Science and Technology. I welcome Mr. John Mayer. He's the speaker for the day. He's a design professional, and he believes in making things work. And the topic for today is that 5 tenets of design thinking. He's here to enlighten us on that subject. I welcome all distinguished heads of institutions and HODs among the audience. And today's guest of honor is Dr. Latha Pillai. She is the Director, Quality Assurance and Rankings in SRM University. We are delighted to have you here, ma'am. Welcome, ma'am.
Okay.
I welcome all the professors, researchers, students, and all faculties who have joined us for the show. Thank you. I request our Dean, Professor Satish, Dr. Satish, to say a few words on the event.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for this fine session of International Talk Series, Day 4. A special welcome to Dr. Latha Pillai, who is a very good friend of mine, a very, very simple, straightforward, and humble personality. We had a very good association in meeting different forums. And she's one of the apt persons for today's session. That's why she has been invited. We should be very happy to have her gracious presence here. And welcome, madam. And special welcome to Mr. Mayer, the speaker for the day. And the topic is going to be on design thinking, which is the need of the hour. I'm sure that's going to be a very interesting session today. And also, thanks to the convener, coordinator, moderator, and Professor Dinesh, who has made all these days possible, a special day today. Let's all enjoy the session. A great welcome to the participants. Let's all stay together and enjoy the session. It's a great learning process. Thank you very much.
Over to you, Anup.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Am I audible, Narayana?
Yes. Please go on.
Yeah. Yes, good evening, everybody. I welcome you all to the Day 4 of the International Talk Series 2020. I would like to extend a special welcome to Dr. Latha Pillai ma'am and to Architect Dinesh for making today's session possible. I'm privileged to welcome today's speaker, John Mayer. John Mayer leads the healthcare design and behavioral science practice at Fractal Analysis. His work in healthcare has focused in understanding patients and providers, particularly in hospital and medical offices. He has a special interest in how technology can change the future of healthcare. John is a graduate of design in Chicago, and prior to working in healthcare, John has designed experiences in Chicago's museum. He had begun his career in software development, working in the US and Germany. Ladies and gentlemen, now I present to you John Mayer. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you. And will we begin with the
before we
polls,
start, we would like to have Dr. Latha Pillai to say a few words and gracious the session.
Oh, okay. Good morning, Mr. John Mayer. It's nice of you to join us from Chicago on a Sunday morning for this international talk series. Thank you for including me in this webinar as well, and welcome to all the participants who are here to listen to the expert. The theme of the webinar is 5 tenets of design thinking. I think it's very apt and gains a renewed importance in the pandemic that the world is going through. Design, by its very nature, I think is a very creative process, and design thinking is an iterative process which goes, undoubtedly with the customer at the center or the focus of all activities. The speaker of today, I'm particularly enamored by your background because I'm a behavioral scientist. So a combination of behavioral science, technology, and health, I think, is all three expertises rolled into one, and we're waiting to look forward to you, to listen to you. We hear a lot these days about 3D printing, about PPEs designing. We hear about office spaces being renovated to suit present circumstances, hospital and workspaces. So I'm sure design thinking is something which is very critical to what is happening around us. The School of Architecture and Interior Design at the SRM Institute of Science and Technology over the past 2 decades has been conducting programs in architecture and interior designing. It has also got doctoral programs with a large number of students enrolled. I'd like to congratulate Dr. Satish Kumar, the Dean, the organizer, Ms. Esther, and her team for putting together this kind of a program where people can come together, listen to experts, and I'm sure make use of the time that we have during the lockdown. Over to Mr. John Meyer for a very interesting and interactive session, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, madam. That's a very fantastic introduction. So nice of you. Thank you.
Can I continue to listen?
Yes, with pleasure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Yes,
A quick,
John.
before John could start, I would want to inform all the participants that this would be an interactive session. John has a lot of questions that he expects us to join hands with him to participate, and so that it will help his presentation go forth based on our participation. So I request all participants and audience, please participate in all of those poll questions. Thank you, John. Over.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will begin by presenting my screen. And then we can, there are always many buttons to push. Okay, I would like to talk about the 5 tenets of design thinking. And thank you very much, everyone, for those kind introductions. And I must say that now I'm a little relieved I'm not talking about behavior science today, knowing that there are experts on the line. So design is something that I have been doing for some time. And I put together these 5 tenets as I was instructing businesses about how to use design thinking in their enterprise. And I'd like to begin with a couple of questions for the audience. So the first poll is, can architects design things other than buildings? All right, and I'd like to ask you all to weigh in. Do we have the poll set up then, Anoop?
Give me a second, John. I'm just on it. Yes, 1 second.
Okay, okay. And while that's coming, here it is. So we would love to hear from you. I'm seeing the poll results. I'm going to move that up onto.
Another 5 seconds and we'll end the poll, John.
Very good. And I apologize for the screen dropping out of presentation mode, but I'd like to put that up. So there is a fairly broad agreement. Can architects design things other than buildings? Yes. Great. Great. I think that's fine. And then let me go ahead and move to the next slide. And oh, it's not going away. I'll close this. So our second poll then is here. If we ask this question a little differently and give you different options. Can architects design things other than buildings? A, yes, we can design a huge building, so we can design anything. B, no, because why would we want to, right? Or C, yes, if we apply the right principles from architecture. So let's look at the poll here and please weigh in. We'll give you about 30 seconds. And we're getting a pretty broad agreement. Pretty broad agreement. Okay. So for about 95%, I might not even give this talk, but maybe we will go ahead and I will talk about what those principles are from architecture and how you can apply them. So what I'm interested in is giving you some background on how the thinking that you use in architecture, which is a design discipline, can be applied to other problems as well. I am going to use some examples from my earlier career, which was in museums. I developed content, which was mostly the verbal and writing side, and also designed spaces in some of Chicago's museums. However, these tenets are really fundamental to all design and problem solving. And of course, now in the era that we're in lockdown here in the US as well as in India. There are lots of problems to be solved. And architects and designers alike can solve these problems. And really, we're talking about problems that involve systems. And I think you'll probably agree that in architecture, the problems that you address are not just building things like buildings, but really you are designing systems. So it's very important to think of this as a systems-oriented approach. You might also ask, why are we looking at a user-centered approach to problem solving? Why do we care about the people involved? Doesn't everybody do that? Well, the answer is no. And as you get out of school and you begin to work with others in business, you may find that there are other priorities that are often placed on projects. And one very common one is that the goal is actually to finish the goals that you started with. And in business, very often the leaders will ask for a solution before you even begin starting the problem. They want to know what they're going to get. Okay, so if I give you money to solve this problem, what will you be delivering? And of course, it's very difficult to know that without knowing anything about the people involved. So that is very prevalent in business, and this is a way to approach those problems. Hopefully you're able to convince the leaders that this is worthwhile. So let's go through these one by one, and I'm going to look at each one. So the first is learn directly from the people involved. There are two really fundamental ways to do this. One is to speak to the people, and the other is to observe. And it's really important to do both, because people will give you answers, but what they do and what they say are generally different. So observation is also critical, and it's your job not to ask them what they want. It's your job to figure out what they need, and perhaps also what they want, and then to put that together into a workable solution. Observation and the idea of talking to them, interviews, are very important. There are many excellent works and books about all kinds of methods that are variations of these two fundamentals that you can use to get that information. There are three fundamental questions, and they're not necessarily the ones on screen. The ones on screen are also important. But who are the people involved? You want to know about all the people involved. Who are the hidden users? For example, in a public building like a museum, who visits the museum? And also who works in the museum, who works in the offices? Who cleans it? And what about the food service? There are all kinds of people that you're designing for, not simply the people who walk in the front door in the morning. The second I call, what are their business needs? What work are they trying to get done? And you have to think about that really in a disciplined way. What is it that they're trying to get done? In a museum, it's very, it may be very unclear. If you're designing, say, an office building, well, they're trying to come to work and get, people are trying to get their work done. But also, what are their needs in context? So what's it like to be them? Designers talk about empathy. In a museum, you might think about families visiting a museum, and you can ask, well, have they traveled to get there? By the time they get there, they may be tired. For families with young children, very often the first thing that they need when they enter the building is a restroom for the children. So there are many kinds of things that influence what their experience is really like. So let's ask you another question. And I'm going to ask about something that you've done. For an architecture assignment, have you ever asked questions of people who would use the building or the space? Or B, observed what people do in a similar building or space? And C, have you ever heard from the client what people want? And I'm going to ask you to choose C only if you've never done either A or B. So let's go to another poll.
Narani, can we have the poll?
Dinesh, just check on your timeline.
Yeah,
Below?
it's launched.
Yeah, it's comment.
Yes. Yes.
So as the numbers come up, I see this is very interesting. Observation is big. That's great. That's really good. And of course, asking questions, talking to people. When we ask them the questions, we wouldn't ask them, well, what do you want? But we would ask them about their activity, about their work. Okay, poll jumped off the screen. And then, of course, heard from the client what people want. The thing is that very often what the clients will tell us is not very representative or doesn't help us very much to understand what people actually want and what people actually do. That's why we have people like design researchers who do this work. Okay, I'm very pleased to see that there's a lot of observation and talking to people. So the second design tenet is is frame the problem from the insider's perspective. This is a little bit subtle. You have to ask, what experience are people having with our offerings and business? What's it like for them to get what they want? And in a business context, what does it mean to win, which includes the customer experience? Here's a story from architecture, also from a museum that I worked in. So there was a designer there who did beautiful drawings. He did these beautiful renderings, and they were drawn as if you had placed a camera up in a corner of the ceiling. And they were great for showing all of the exhibit at once, the overall layout. It was a bird's eye view. However, I was called in after this designer had designed this exhibit, and I was asked to basically try to fix it because the children were not playing with it as expected. Well, in terms of framing, what are the primary users of a children's exhibit in a museum trying to do? Well, they're trying to play. So one of the first things I did was I got into the exhibit and I got down on my knees to put my eyes down at the level where the children's eyes are. And I found that all of that pretty exhibit that looked great from a bird's eye view didn't mean very much from the eye level. So it's very important to understand then what it's like to use it from the perspective of those who work there, or who work there, who are, in this case, the children who are playing. Another example might be if you were designing a space for a cocktail party, what experience are people trying to have? So if it were a cocktail party with only drinks, you might not even need tables. But if you designed it for a cocktail party that had some food and hors d'oeuvres, suddenly you realize that people have only two hands, and then they probably have plates and a drink, and you might want to include some tables. So getting into that and thinking about what the people are doing from their perspective is really important. So let's go to the next poll. And here. So for an architecture, whoops, I seem to have obscured the, well, you have the poll, you have the questions, even if you don't see it on screen. So have you ever written a list of what people want to do in the building, right? What does the problem look like to those people? And I see yes. Wow, that's great. Okay. In my first design class, this was one of the things that we would do. We would write a list of issues and objectives. And of course, as researchers, we do this all the time. So we got 88% said yes, that you have written a list. That's great. Let's go on to design tenet number 3. Consider more than one solution. So this is very interesting because as you get out into the working world, you'll find that a lot of times, you know, there's only one solution considered. Very often, people who work in an organization are asked to figure out what they're going to do, how much money they're going to need, and when they are going to get it done. And then, as a result, they work on only one solution. The problem with that is they've invested all their money before they ever have a chance to learn whether the solution is going to work, and before they ever learn anything about the people that they're trying to serve. So good news is in architecture, you probably do a lot of sketches and drawings, right? So it's also important to consider more than one functional solution. So you may consider, you know, well, should I, you know, build 2 rooms and make room A bigger or room B bigger? And there might be sketches about the changes in appearance, but the function is really, really important as well. And part of this tenet is to really diverge and consider many, many different types of functional solutions. The last question on screen right now, how do the proposed solutions compare based on our goals? This is not meant at this stage to be very evaluative. It's meant to help you generate more solutions. So as you try things and you ask yourself, I've drawn this sketch, I've drawn another, how do they compare based on our goals? Well, if neither of them meet your goals, then you might, you know, start to draw even more. So it's really important to generate lots and lots of different solutions at this point. Okay, this one, I'm going to predict that the results will be a little lopsided. For a space or building design, have you ever drawn more than one sketch? Yeah. The question should be, have you ever not drawn more than one sketch?
Yes.
Okay, that one's a pretty easy one. Let's see. Technology. Okay. So the 4th design tenet is something that's very particular to product design and the kinds of design that we do. Make and test solutions with real people. And this is a really interesting one. We call this prototyping. Sometimes we talk about rapid prototyping, in which you go out into the real world, into the field, and you might make mock-ups and you change them very fast. So you build something, but you go out with the ability to change it so that you can go through several in one day and make several observations in one day. Of course, in the digital realm, this is also very common. With digital tools, it's very easy to make changes. And generally with prototyping, what you find is as soon as something stops working, as soon as you see a couple of people have not used it like you want, then you'll want to make the change. It's more difficult to prove that something actually works. It takes more testing to verify that it's good. because there still might be a significant percentage, say 20%, who experience a problem with your prototype. So you may want to change that prototype. It takes more testing to verify that it works. But the problems, when something is really wrong, you find it pretty quickly. Oh no. And I have to ask, are you able to still hear me?
Yes, John.
Yes, John.
Yes.
Okay. I apologize. My power has just flickered. I will try to get my
The system is
screen
on.
back.
The slide is on as well. The slide is on as well.
All right. Good. Well, we'll go with that. And we just may see. I've lost my cursor. Is it possible to take the poll off of the screen? That's not, I've lost my cursor here.
Has it gone off?
So.
John, are you still able to see the poll?
Yes. I can see the poll, yes. And unfortunately, I can't see my cursor, so I'm not able to click the tiny circle to make it go away.
Well, do you want to start the sharing again, John? Might be able to get your cursor back.
Let me see. There we go. All right. So we were left with test solutions with real people. Here we go. Okay, so some of this slide may be obscured, but let me ask the question. Let me read it. Here's our next poll. For an architecture interior, have you ever created a life-size mock-up and watched people interact with it? And so the answers are yes or no. And here we have a lot of no. That's very interesting. Yeah. So this is something that you can do. There's a design firm in Chicago that's known for building entire rooms out of foam core. And they go through a lot of foam core. And they'll build new walls, new partitions. They'll mock up entire office furniture systems, almost entirely in foam core. So another way to do this, if you're going to test with real people, is you can find a similar environment and then you can just change one thing. So another way of testing is to, let some other environment work for you and just change the part that you want to change. When you test, it's there are functional prototypes and there are visual prototypes. So there's looks like and works like. An example of a looks like prototype you probably do a lot of. This would, a drawing is considered that. Also, when you build models. So if you build 3D model scale models, this is also a form of a visual prototype. What I'm really talking about here are the functional prototypes. And so this might be, another way of doing this might be to take, say in a room, rearranging the furniture, and then, you can put part of your solution in, and with the, part of your solution can be that rearrangement of furniture, even though you don't have the new chairs and tables. And then you could build your mock-up that way. I could imagine if you were designing, say, a coffee shop or some other venue like that, that you could do this. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next. The fifth design tenet is implement to learn and innovate. So if you go on the internet and you Google about the tenets of design thinking, and you're very likely to find the first four that we've gone through already. You'll find about all about learning from people involved, framing, prototyping. What is a little more unclear is the idea of learning and continuous learning while your product is out in the world and while your system is out in the world. So you know, especially in the digital world, there are changes all the time. In fact, these products that we're so familiar with, like Google and Facebook, Amazon, they are updating their software multiple times a day. Of course, that means that they have a lot of people working behind the scenes, and then the software updates are coming fast and furious. If you have a product, say that even that you're selling in a store, you're going to want to keep track of things like customer feedback. Are you getting complaints? Are you getting questions? All of this is data, and it's very important to keep track of that and try and learn from it. Some of that data may be directly useful. Some of it points to where there is an issue, but it doesn't tell you exactly what you need to do. And some of that data then will spur you to innovate the next iteration or to conduct more research to try to solve the problem. A friend of mine in design said that the idea of designing a product and then making it and then putting it out in the market is just very 19th century. This is the way that we used to do things, but today we have to have continuous learning in the environment. And that's why with the Internet of Things, you start to have devices that may send in data. You have devices that then indicate their own need for maintenance or might connect to users in different ways. They actually might learn from their use, and the product maker can learn as well. So let's go to our next poll. Do architects ever change buildings or spaces after they are built and occupied? So let's see the poll for this.
John, if I may interrupt, I think the slide is not moving. The
slide is not. Oh.
Yes, it is on the 4-pointer yet, make and test solutions. So I think you can reshare the screen if possible.
Very good. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you. Thanks, John. Yeah.
Implement to learn and innovate. So do architects ever change the buildings or spaces? Yes. So some have said yes and some have said no. And as one of your professors pointed out to me yesterday, it may be that the architect who builds the building is not the one who ends up changing it later. I walk when I do go to work, I know none of us are doing that right now. I walk past it's now called the Willis Tower. It used to be called the Sears Tower. And at one time it was the world's tallest building. They're putting a whole new lobby onto that building. It's a big project being undertaken right now. It's going to be nice, I think, when they finish it. For the time being, it's been kind of obstructing the sidewalk on my way to work. So we do see this, the changes being made after they're occupied. Okay, I'm going to move ahead now. And so let's go ahead and wrap up and revisit our questions from the beginning of the talk, and then we can have some discussion and some Q&A. So now what do you think? Can architects design things other than buildings? So we have the previous poll on. Yeah. So yes, we can design a huge building, so we can design anything. Or no, because why would we want to? Or C, yes, if we apply the right principles from architecture. So interesting perspective here, interesting perspective. So for those of you who answered C, I appreciate it. For those who answered A, perhaps you're picking up on the fact that, yes, you do a lot of systems thinking, you do a lot of user-centered thinking already. And so you can apply those principles, right? It is true that architects really do work in systems and you really do design things for people. So I hope that this has been helpful. And now you know about the 5 tenets of design thinking. I want to also add that these steps are a way of thinking. They're not necessarily a process. So when you go through them, you may find yourself iterating. You may find yourself circling back. You may find that as you move into one phase, you realize that you need more information. You need to go back to the people who are involved and learn from them. You may find as you test that something is coming out that perhaps you didn't frame the problem properly. Or of course, finally, after the building is even built, you may find that there's still a need to learn something and make some changes. In the museum world, we had names for all of these different steps. In architecture, perhaps you have names for many of them or processes associated with each one. So I encourage you to go out there and keep the user in mind, learn from them, and test solutions, try things out, and make something awesome. So I think, Anoop, I'll go back to you and see if we can start the question and answer part of this program.
John, if you can just pull down your screen share so that we can have you back on Spotlight. Yes, thank you, John.
Very good.
Before we head on to the question Q&A, I would like to bring up an interesting person here. Madonna, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Yes, the screen is yours to have a word with John. Can you start?
Okay. Wow. I'm not prepared for a video, but okay.
That's fine.
Hi, everyone.
You look great. Hi, Madonna.
So, John, I think it was really, thank you for that presentation. And I loved that you used polls. It was really interactive. And I think I'm curious about two aspects. One is about the empathy. So as architects, we don't have a lot of, we're not really taught to empathize with users. We're taught about spaces and how it could work for the client. But how would we go about doing that? And I think I want you to plug in about how you use that to design museums, because you know your client was sort of like 15 or 20 artists. So how would you empathize with each artist? And the second thing is in terms of implementation, I really love that you brought up this entire thing about how buildings change, right? Like over a period of time, they grow bigger as families go bigger. And it's much more easier to do that with exhibits because the structures are not permanent. But how do architects like kind of think of that future, or if it's even necessary to think about it?
So I'll start there. So how architects can think of the future. I think that one thing would be to consider if you're trying to make something new and you're trying to enable an experience or work for people, do consider what if we're really successful? So what if we build this building and then, you know, like right now we think we have a certain size audience or clientele. Well, what if we do such a good job that lots of people will want to use this? You know, will we be overcrowded, et cetera?
Okay.
I think that one of the real constraints in the real world for the idea of changes is that the constraint is the way that we fund projects. Mm-hmm. And so it may not be possible to do a lot at one point. However, you could be thinking ahead. You could think, well, if we were going to expand this, if we're going to change it, you know, hopefully you're not going to rearrange everything. You do see a lot of this in a lot of places where systems are designed flexibly. They're almost non-designed, right? With a a raised floor so that you can run new wiring, etc., movable furniture. And I'm not an expert in architecture, so I guess I have a limited answer to that.
Okay.
But I would say, yeah, always design for a lot of success. You know, at the museum, sometimes they would design the ticket purchase experience, and they would ask a lot of questions. We want to gather data, but then they generated long lines.
Right.
Because they were spending so much time asking people questions. And on a busy day when we were really successful, that process just was not a good idea. You know, we should have stopped collecting that data. You asked a number of other questions. Let's see.
Sorry about that. The first one was more about how do you empathize with the client when you don't really have the time to immerse with them and like basically understand their background and their story, right? Yeah. So usually you end up designing space on your own. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I want to push back on you don't have the time. And this is something that we always say. So consider it this way. Let's reframe the problem and say, if what is it about time? We don't have time. Well, that's cost, right? Say, well, it's cost. Do we have, you know, we talk about resources, time, and money. So we say, okay, it's going to cost too much in terms of time, in terms of money. Well, what is the cost of getting it wrong? What is the cost of having your building crew on site and then finding out that you've done something wrong, or having it built and opened and then finding out that something's not right and then having to do a revision or a renovation? So I think you really have to weigh your risks at each stage. And this can be done. You know, your project managers can do this, and you can present that to clients. In terms of how you empathize, I would think that, you know, in spaces, be they interior, even exterior, you can look at other similar spaces. Look at other similar spaces. And then the other part is the mock-ups. So maybe you have a space and you can do something to that space to make it more like what you want to design. And you can test and see what people do.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah. So now what about the other three questions? So
I mean, I guess
I want
to leave it for like other people to ask questions. So maybe we'll do this on chat later on. Yeah.
Sure, we'll talk more. So full disclosure, Madonna and I work together, so I have the privilege of working with her. And Dennis, you had a lot to do with making this interactive. So thank you for that.
Thank you, John. John, I have a couple of more questions from the audience. Let me shoot out one question here. What is your say on design thinking when we design for a very large population where we don't know who the users are going to be, especially, example, apartments?
Apartments. So then you have to, there's probably some data out in the world. So this is a very important point, and thank you for bringing it up. We certainly, we want to tailor our methods to the project, right? So in the case of, say, designing apartments, let's say we're going to design a large apartment building. You can use data that's out in the world. So we can still, in this case, maybe we won't learn directly from the people involved, but we can learn from them through data. Data is a reflection of behavior. So if you have an apartment block, where is it going to be? How expensive are the apartments going to be, right? Who's going to live there? What is the mix of people? Do we imagine a lot of families? Do we imagine that this is for senior citizens? Has it already been, has the clientele, have they already been decided upon? Is it a senior citizen home? Is it housing that's publicly funded? So what do we know about, based on pricing, based on location, who's likely to be able to afford to live there, who's going to want to live there? We can find out some things even if we can't necessarily go directly to them. We can also go to people who live in that neighborhood or who live in a similar neighborhood and talk to them. You know, you'd want to measure that moderate how much research you do based on how representative you think your population is, the population in your study. So I think there are ways to maybe discover some things without necessarily just saying we're going to take a sample and interview them. It's just you have to think about it quite a bit, and you might want to engage a professional who's done this type of planning before. I know Madonna's very interested in urban planning, so you might give her a call. So that's
the next question is, instead of live scale model mock-up, how feasible will VR technology play in testing solutions? Or does community interaction in a space give a different and more realistic idea of how the space will feel or be utilized?
Wow, you really helped me answer that question there. So VR, I have never used. I have never used VR. That's an interesting question. I'm a little old-fashioned, so I would tend to not use a lot of VR. Now, here's the one reason I can say why, is that your users are not individuals, right? The people you're serving are not individuals, they are groups. And so the most important thing that you usually want to find is how they interact in groups and interact with each other in the space, right? So your spaces are designed for interactions typically between people. Otherwise, everyone would stay at home like we do now, like we are doing right now. So, you know, I would look to the groups, and that's why the full size is useful, or using a similar space. Yeah.
The next question is, how do you think design helps other sectors? We agreed that the knowledge and right principles can be applied to designing things other than buildings. So how does architecture help other sectors grow?
So first of all, architects design systems, which gives you, a view into systems thinking, and you bring together the idea of space and objects and people, and all of these are very important. So any problem that involves those things, even if there's not necessarily an architectural solution, architects could lend a hand. And you can lend a hand in any part of this. It might be in understanding the people and creating the mock-ups. It might be sort of secondary research, saying, okay, let's look at other ways that we have solved this problem in the past, using space. And finally, a lot of times we bring in architects only when we think we have to build something. It's like, oh, we're going to have to build a wall, we need an architect. Well, maybe the architecture practice can go well beyond that too. Like, where should we put the wall? Should it be a wall? Should it have a window in it? What are people going to do with it? So, yeah.
I'll pose one more last question for you. I have a lot of questions pouring in, but let me just take one more question. We are collecting data from the user who we know, but I feel we leave out indirect users. For example, the birds or animals, which was there already. Your say on that while thinking, do you include all these?
I have never included the birds or animals. Whoever asked this question, you're brilliant. That's a really good question. So yes, you must consider the environment. You must consider the ecology. Absolutely. And I know that sometimes we do consider the birds or environment in a negative way. We put spikes on top of pipes or ledges so that the pigeons don't go there. I got to tell you that when I was in India, I walked out of the dining area with a donut in my hand, and a crow stole it out of my hand. And so I think that the person, it just goes to show that the person who asked this question and that crow were both smarter than me. I think that's a brilliant question, and I think you should.
I'll reveal the name of the person. It's a professor called Grace Ansika. She had put this question to you.
No, well, that's great. I think that's wonderful that you're studying that.
Yeah. Okay. Her name is Grace. Grace. She's a professor working with us in the SRM Institute.
We'll try and get Grace on so that you can.
You can say hi. Can we, Grace? Can we have your video?
Yes, please, Grace.
Is she on?
Grace, are you there? Grace, are you there? Okay.
All right. Okay. Let's.
Okay, well,
We'll give feedback, as in we have a time restriction and still there are a lot of questions. Probably we'll mail it to you and you can see if you can answer those. As of now, I'll leave the team to get feedback for this presentation. Over to you, Anup and Narayani.
Yeah, thank you, Dinesh. Thank you, John. We have with us our international student Bushra from Syria. Bushra, can you just come online?
Yes.
Yes, Bushra.
Can you hear me?
Can you come on the video?
Yes.
Yes, Bushra. Yep.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bushra, please go on.
Yeah. Well, first, I'd love to thank you all. Thank you, Mr. John, for this opportunity. Thank you, our dean and teachers in SRM. It's a great opportunity. I really enjoyed this lecture, the interactive part. Such an eye-opener. And I just like to say that sometimes we get caught up in the design process and we forget about the users. So keeping users in mind and testing our solutions are very important points that I took from this. And I'd like to ask Mr. John, what about if we come from different culture? Like how can we analyze the users, and if the culture is different? If like I'm from
so this is a very good question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, was there anything else?
No, that's it.
Okay, thank you. So from different cultures, it can be both an advantage and a disadvantage. One of my professors in school used to tell us, you must think like a Martian. And what he meant was that you must think like you had never been on planet Earth before. And you have to think about, why are people doing this? And so this is one thing that coming from a different culture may be very positive. On the other hand, you do need to consider the culture and think about what's happening. You don't want to redesign something very strange that's outside of what people will normally do. I think generally being from another culture is a strong advantage, because all of the things about the normal culture you can look up and you can get from your colleagues who are native to that culture. But that thinking and that inquisitiveness, that ability to really think differently, that's a strong advantage. So I think you can do very well with that. I'd say it comes out on the advantage side.
Thank you, Bushra. We have one more student, sir, Kevin. He's a first-year student and he has design thinking as his elective. So Kevin, can you come on? Yeah.
Hello, sir. So actually having this part of my syllabus, and then it really convinces me that I need to start including this up. And the doubt is, as a young architect, as an upcoming architect, how do I convince my client that going through this process is the right way? Because I do not have earlier projects to in my resume, and I need to. How do I implement all of this?
It's a good question, and convincing clients is always difficult. I'd say that one thing is learn to do this quickly and efficiently. Learn to show your results and tell stories, and present your work well. And you don't have to ask your client for permission to do all of these things. A lot of this is just built in, right? You don't necessarily, talk to your client about which version of AutoCAD you might be using. In the same way, you don't have to get permission for all of this. I would say, to the extent you can, make it part of your process. Doing just a little bit can lead to great insight. All that said, it is difficult out in the real world, but I'd say make it part of your practice and do as much as you can as quickly and cheaply as you can. Yeah, it may take you only one day to make a mock-up and a prototype and learn something about it.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. We have our guest of honor, Mrs. Lata Pillai, still with us. Ma'am, would you like to give us feedback for us, please? Lata, ma'am.
Yeah, I liked John Mayer's lecture and especially talk, and especially what he said that, very often these things are like imposed by the funding agency. Priorities are different and they are imposed by the funding agency or the management or elsewhere, and that really struck me. I also liked the interactions that you had. It was nice to get your international student as well as a first year student on board. Congratulations to the department on your initiative.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, John, for that wonderful talk. It was an inspirational and very eye-opening session, and especially with all the kind of caricatures and all the schematic stuff that has been gone in. I think they will be break from the theory part and they will understand it more intently. I would like to call upon our convener, Professor Vayapuri Thangavelu, to give the closing remarks.
Mayor, I have a question to you. What is your, how do you interpret aesthetics into design? Or what are your views on that? Or what are your beliefs on that?
Oh, is this for, I'm sorry, for me?
Pardon?
Yes, John. Yes, John.
I'm
from the convener.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I have a question to you, John. I'll repeat the question. I'll repeat the question. See, how do you interpret aesthetics into design, or what are your beliefs? Or how do you view that aspect in design? The feel-good stuff and all that.
Yeah. So the first thing is that usually it comes last. First, you need to, in my view, in design, we need to figure out the functional parts. I like to say that design is not about making things look good. Design is about making things work. Now, the aesthetics are a part of that, but first you have to get the functional elements aligned. And then the aesthetics play a very powerful role in creating an experience, creating an emotional experience. So I think that, especially the aesthetics help to frame as people come in, that's the first thing they see, right? So in the design process, though, we have to make sure that we have things in the right place, and then we can mind the aesthetics. So it's very important, but it does tend to come to follow the others. And as far as aesthetics, you're talking to someone who's struggled with years for color. The internet has helped me a lot. I think that, you know, some people are really good with aesthetics and get the people who are really good at it. That's my approach, which is more about my shortcoming as a designer. But generally, that's my approach is aesthetics follow.
Whatever it is, that's the first thing. It will catch the people. People will go for that. No, then you can take your time to explain about the function and all these things and all. But that is non-negotiable. Aesthetic is part and parcel of design. So I just wanted to know your views. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, it was a very wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it, and I hope all of the audience would have enjoyed it. And thank you all the audience for joining in good numbers and being interactive with the session also. That made it very interesting. Yet I think John has got the polls till now. So no other speaker had so many polls also. So it was very interesting. Thank you, John, once again. Thank you, our special guest, Dr. Lata Pillai. Thank you all professors. Thank you all professors, organizers. It was a very wonderful session. Thank you, Narayani. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. I would like our Dean, Dr. P. Satish Kumar, to give a few words.
Thank you, madam. And Architect John, I think it is very excellent. I'm surprised, openly to say. In fact, we have done many number of projects, and my design thinking perspective is changed from today's session. In the sense, I looked at my client as a business product or a commodity. Whatever he or she wants, I was able to deliver. So it is a one-to-one session. Probably I look them as a direct product or direct user, and few others as an indirect user. That is what I looked at it. And my design thinking went on like that. But after looking at your presentation, my understanding of doing so many projects is I think it takes a diversion. I agree. And other one, Professor Grace Ansika's question has really opened out my mind. See, when we do the Bhumi Puja for the project, after any design thinking or analysis and the studies, whatever we make, we clear this flora and fauna and all these small birds, animals, insects, and everything is being removed from the place, and we say that beautiful structure is getting elevated. And really, we really forgot this kind of creatures where that is their place. We removed the forest, we removed all these flora, fauna, creatures, animals, birds, insects, everything, and we do something else. And that's a very eye-opening question, what that madam has put it up, and you also answered it very well. It's I'm sure as very typical to your putting out, it's a very brilliant question. The second one, other guest has asked, the purpose or the culture. Probably a person with a different culture could change that space for other person with a different culture. Probably an adaptive reuse kind of thinking could be definitely be considered. I think this is all a good eye-opening from your presentations. Sometimes, I was a bit stuck to listen to your session. It was very, very, very inspiring. It's very open up. Because it was close to my heart. That is what I felt like saying. Thank you very much, sir. It is a very amazing session. And also all the people who has put a very brilliant questions. Thank you so much. And all the participants. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, John, for being with us on this wonderful evening. In spite of the morning there, I think you spent enough time with us today, and it was a wonderful session. Thank you, John. Thank you, Anup. Thank you, convener, sir, Vayapuri, sir. Thank you, Dinesh, for taking the effort to bring John to us and to the student fraternity along with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Hope to see you soon. And have a good
pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Lata ma'am, for joining us. Have a good evening, ma'am.
Thank you. The session for today, tomorrow's session is on smart cities. So students and researchers who have already been following us, please join us tomorrow at 5:30 p.m. Indian time. Thank you.